Welcome to the Library of Ideas, produced by the Academy and Institute for Scientific and Educational Thought. In this fifth episode, we travel to 16th century Spain, the empire where gold, God, and governance collided, and where theology first met the marketplace on equal terms. In the 16th century, Spain stood at the center of a rapidly transforming world. Its empire stretched across oceans, its galleons carried silver from the Americas, its merchants connected Europe with Asia through routes never before imagined. Never in human history had wealth and risk been so visibly global. The medieval order of land and faith, where every exchange was bound by custom and morality, began to collapse beneath the weight of maritime expansion, colonial conquest, and a restless money economy. For the first time, moral theology faced the shock of a truly world economy. The flood of precious metals destabilized prices, unhinging the link between labor, justice, and value. What had once been measured in divine order now trembled under the judgment of human hands. Within this turmoil, the theologians of Salamanca confronted an uncomfortable truth. Commerce was no longer a sin at the margins, but the living center of civilization itself. The market had become a moral battlefield. The Church, long the guardian of virtue, could no longer pretend that the ledger was a lesser gospel. Spanish theologians, fiercely loyal to Catholic orthodoxy, yet sharpened by the realities of empire, began to rethink the moral nature of price, profit, and risk. Their goal was not to sanctify greed, but to understand how intention, justice, and divine order could survive in a world ruled by ships, contracts, and speculation. In that struggle, Spain became a living experiment in modernity, a vast laboratory where theology, empire, and economy collided. From this crucible emerged the first glimmers of what we now call ethical capitalism, a world in which the soul had to find its place among silver, trade winds, and the ticking pulse of profit. Sometimes thought needs silence to unfold. If these ideas find a place in you, perhaps stay a little longer. Subscribe and walk with the Library of Ideas. There's much more waiting beyond this page. Let's turn it together. In a moment. In the lecture halls of Salamanca, a quiet revolution was unfolding. Francisco de Vitoria, Domingo de Soto, Juan de Mariana, and Luis de Molina, men of the cloth, guardians of doctrine, found themselves face to face with the restless pulse of the new economy. Merchants, contracts, risk, and uncertainty. They belonged to a church that had long condemned profit, yet their age demanded a new question. One no earlier theologians had dared to ask. How can morality survive in a world where profit is not sin, but necessity? Instead of rejecting commerce, they chose to understand it. Gain, they argued, was not inherently immoral. It became unjust only when it violated consent, fairness, or truth. In this subtle yet radical shift, the moral weight of economic action moved from the act itself to the intention behind it. The Salamancans were not moralizing traders. They were theologians who redefined sin in the language of contracts. They taught that fairness lay not in equality of outcome, but in the integrity of will. To deceive was evil, to profit justly was service. In this redefinition, ethics became compatible with enterprise. Their reasoning quietly anticipated what later economists would call subjective value. Objects, they observed, possess no intrinsic worth. Value arises from human perception, from desire, need, and circumstance. A loaf of bread is priceless to the starving, trivial to the full. Centuries before the Austrian school, these monks glimpsed that markets were not mechanical systems, but human dramas. Theatres of conscience as much as of calculation. Price, in their eyes, became a conversation between souls, not merely a number upon a coin. By translating theology into the language of trade, they began a transformation that would turn moral philosophy into economic science. What started as a defense of conscience evolved, almost imperceptibly, into the logic of capitalism itself. For the thinkers of Salamanca, justice in exchange could no longer be dictated from the pulpit or enforced by the crown. The just price, once seen as a fixed moral ratio, ordained by divine law or civic decree, began to change its meaning. It became not a command from above, but an outcome of human interaction below. A price, they argued, was just when it emerged from free consent, when neither buyer nor seller was coerced, deceived, or monopolized. It was the meeting of wills, not the judgment of rulers, that made an exchange moral. This was a profound rearrangement of moral geometry. Instead of imposing virtue upon the market, they discovered virtue within it. The fairness of a trade no longer depended on the intrinsic worth of a good, nor on the piety of those involved, but on the voluntary character of the transaction itself. Where there was consent without fraud, the outcome could be trusted. Freedom itself became the measure of justice. In this light, the market was reborn, not as a moral suspect, but as a moral instrument. Economic order was no longer the adversary of divine justice, but its mirror, so long as it operated under the condition of liberty. The scholars of Salamanca thus anticipated, centuries ahead of Adam Smith, the notion that freedom in exchange could yield social harmony. They never abandoned theology, but they infused it with a startling realism, that God's law might express itself through the mutual will of human beings, rather than through royal edict or ecclesiastical decree. In the cloisters of Salamanca, a quiet revolution took place. The market, once shadowed by suspicion, was redeemed as a space where justice could arise spontaneously from human liberty. The paradox was clear: morality did not vanish from economics. It found a new home within it. For centuries, the charging of interest was condemned as a moral abomination, a sin against both charity and nature. To lend money and demand more in return was, according to medieval doctrine, to sell time itself. And time, of course, belonged only to God. But in the 16th century, the theologians of Salamanca began to question this ancient taboo. Observing the growing complexity of trade and risk, they asked whether all profit on loans could truly be sinful. Their answer would quietly transform the moral architecture of the West. They argued that lending was not exploitation when it compensated for risk, opportunity cost, or the loss incurred through inflation. If a merchant lent money and might not be repaid, was he not entitled to something for the danger he bore? This subtle reasoning changed everything. Profit on a loan could be just if it reflected uncertainty, sacrifice, or the chance foregone by helping another. Ethics, for the first time, recognized time itself as an element of justice. In that insight, the Salamancans gave moral legitimacy to the heartbeat of modern finance: credit. Money, once condemned as sterile, became capable of productive life. It could circulate, generate enterprise, and reward prudence rather than hoarding. Their distinction between sinful usury and fair compensation transformed the moral economy of Europe. Capital could finally be mobilized without guilt. What had once been denounced as avarice became an instrument of mutual benefit, a way for wealth to move instead of rot. The banker, the merchant, and the monk could at last share the same moral universe. The school of Salamanca, in essence, baptized the modern loan. Interest, rightly understood, was not the theft of time, but the payment for trust, a fragile bridge between moral duty and economic necessity. From that bridge, the architecture of modern capitalism would quietly begin to rise, an edifice built not on greed, but on the rediscovery of faith in human promise. The galleons that brought silver from the New World did more than enrich Spain. They destabilized Europe. Prices soared, coins lost their worth, and the delicate relationship between money and goods began to unravel. What most saw as chaos, the theologians of Salamanca began to see as pattern. They were among the first to perceive that an abundance of silver, more money chasing the same goods, could raise prices and weaken purchasing power. What they observed was inflation, though they lacked the word for it. Luis de Molina noted that when silver grew plentiful, money became cheap. Its value fell as its quantity rose. This was the germ of what modern economists call the quantity theory of money. 2 centuries before the Enlightenment, a friar in a Dominican cloak had already described the mechanics of price levels. Juan de Mariana pushed the argument further. He accused the Spanish crown of debasing its currency and raising taxes, a subtle form of theft from its own subjects. His treatise, De Monete Mutatione, 1609, reads like an early manifesto against inflationary policy and fiscal deceit. Through these reflections, the Salamancans transformed moral outrage into economic reasoning. They no longer viewed money as a divine constant, but as a human instrument shaped by trust, scarcity, and political power. They understood that a king's mint could alter not only the coinage, but the conscience of a nation. Their writings revealed a new dimension of moral economy, one where fiscal policy carried spiritual weight. When governments manipulated money, they sinned not only against reason, but against justice. Well, 2 centuries before Adam Smith or David Ricardo, these monks were already dissecting the interplay between supply, demand, and social balance. They turned theology into the embryo of political economy, showing that even divine order must be counted and weighed. In the quiet libraries of Salamanca, beneath the rustle of robes and candlelight, the first macroeconomic ideas took form, born not of greed or ambition, but of moral curiosity about the world God had made. The thinkers of Salamanca left behind more than theological arguments. They offered a vision of a moral economy. In their eyes, the market could be just, provided it operated without coercion or deceit, and profit was earned through risk, trust, and honest exchange. Wealth itself was not evil. Its legitimacy depended on the integrity of its creation. This was ethical capitalism in embryonic form, an economy grounded not in greed, but in cooperation. They imagined a world where commerce served the common good, where competition was tempered by conscience, and where contracts were more than legal instruments, they were moral promises. To trade was to engage in a covenant of trust, not a contest of cunning. By recognizing that reciprocity and honesty sustain exchange, the Salamancans anticipated what modern economists would later call the social fabric of markets. Freedom to them was not license, it was responsibility. To act freely was to act rightly. Their intellectual lineage stretches across centuries. The Austrian school, from Menger to Hayek, inherited their understanding that value is subjective, born not from matter but from perception. Adam Smith carried forward their conviction that free exchange, properly ordered, generates harmony rather than chaos. And the Catholic social thought of the 20th century echoed their belief that liberty must serve justice, not replace it. In this way, the school of Salamanca became a bridge between medieval conscience and modern capitalism. They proved that profit need not corrupt, that trade, guided by moral reason, can become an act of faith in human dignity. Well, their world of parchment and prayer may be gone, but the questions they asked still define our age. How can freedom remain just? How can prosperity remain humane? Perhaps their greatest gift was the reminder that morality and the market are not enemies, but partners in the same fragile enterprise, the pursuit of human flourishing. Thank you for listening to the Library of Ideas, a project of the Academy and Institute for Scientific and Educational Thought. New episodes appear every Wednesday and Saturday, a rhythm for curious minds who still believe ideas can change the world. Join us next time for Episode 6. How Renaissance bankers shaped the modern world. We'll explore how Florence and Venice turned accounting into art, and how credit, calculation, and courage gave birth to modern finance. Until then, keep thinking, keep questioning, and try to spend your time as wisely as your money.